Hello everyone. Hopefully you can hear me loud and clear, and you're able to understand me with my Scottish accent as well. So I believe we have about 20 participants signed up today, but I'm not sure we expect them all to come. So I will probably start promptly just in a minute or so. So thank you for attending. And while we're waiting for anyone else to join, I'm quite happy during the presentation at any point, if anybody wants to stop me and ask any questions at any point or make any comments. I'm quite happy to do that, but there'll be an opportunity to do this at the end of the webinar as well. In fact, could somebody take their mic off and just say that you can hear me? David, are you there? Could you?
Yeah, I can hear you fine. Yeah, and
I can hear you.
Great.
Excellent. Okay, it's just strange when I'm just talking to a screen with just some names there, but no problem.
Yeah, understood. Yeah, thanks. That's all good. Thank you.
Thanks, David.
We're like all those secondary students that always have their cameras off.
I know, it's interesting, isn't it? Like you go back to being one of the learners yourself, and then you find yourself doing the things that you ask your students not to do. It is entertaining. Right, okay, well, I'll just probably make a start here. And hopefully you would have received, I sent everybody, all the participants, an email today of the slides that I will talk through. The first part of the presentation will probably just be me going through the slides and talking a bit about my experience, trying to give you a few tips and techniques that are practical in nature. And then there's an opportunity for you to have a practice of some of the techniques that I found very useful in the past, and lots of my colleagues have as well, and I've been running this training before. Okay, there's just someone else coming in. Okay, welcome, Michelle. Okay, so I'm just going to share my screen, my desktop, to get the presentation here. Okay, hopefully now you can see my screen and the presentation that I will start up there. Okay, just put this down here. So, welcome everybody today to Interview Techniques for International Teaching Posts. Now, I posed the question to you earlier in terms of why the word interview sets fear in people, and what could we do to possibly, what could we do to allay those fears in terms of the word interview? I think if somebody was to say to me, right, I'm just going to go and have a chat with you just now in a coffee shop, that would be fine for a prospective employer. But as soon as the word interview comes into play, then you start to get a bit nervous and you think, hold on here, you know, I'm really on show here. So the word interview itself makes, you know, holds a lot of fear for a lot of people and makes a lot of people very nervous. So the one technique I would use myself, as I like coming from a sporting background, I see it more as a performance. I suppose a bit like a game, in terms of you have to go and perform on that day. And it might not necessarily be who you are on an everyday basis, but you have to go and perform for that period of time to try and get the best out of that possibility as you can, that opportunity. So it's difficult because you are on show, you're sitting down yourself in a seat and people are judging you. It's going to be a situation that's quite stressful for you. But the way that I try and combat it is I see it as a performance. That's something that I would really get myself up for and try and, you know, get myself motivated for, to make sure I was enthusiastic for it as well. Okay, so admit Angela. Welcome, Angela. Okay, as I've said before, I'm happy for anybody to stop me at any point to ask questions. So I don't think I've introduced myself yet. My name is Martin Pate. Hopefully you'll understand me. I am from Glasgow in Scotland. I'll try and speak slowly, but please stop me if there's anything that you don't understand. My role here at North Anglia International School, Hong Kong, is the Director of Sport and Head of Physical Education. So I've been here now for 6 years, and I've thoroughly enjoyed my time starting up the school back from scratch in 2014. Before that, I taught in Scotland for many years as well. So I'll let you know a bit about my background in terms of my interview history. Now, it doesn't really make pleasant reading, because I think if I work out the stats here, I've had 12 interviews in my teaching career, and I have managed to secure 8 of them. So what's that? Maybe 66%. So back in 1999, I graduated from Edinburgh University, and then I got my first teaching post in Eastern Bartonshire Council, close to Glasgow. I managed to get that straight away, 1 from 1. Then head of pastoral education, 3 out of 4 there. So there was one time where I was up against only one other candidate, a 50% chance, and I didn't get the post from the interview. Then in 2004, I decided I wanted to go down the route of head of physical education. And I went for one interview there, and I didn't get it as well. And I look back on that and I probably cringe at some of the answers I gave at that point. And I understand now probably why I wasn't a suitable candidate. I just think in my career, I probably wasn't ready for it in 2004 to be the head of PE. Then in 2010, I was a deputy head of school. I got 2 out of 4 interviews there. And then more recently, well, not that recently, I suppose, 2014 and 2016, getting my post here at North Anglia as in the head of PE and the director of sport. So that's my interview history. But on the next slide, my real interview experience really comes between the years of 2010 and 2014. And that was when I had my deputy post in my school in the UK. I was responsible for the newly qualified teachers within the school, so that we spent quite a lot of time with them applying for jobs, doing the whole application process, the CVs, and then practicing mock interviews and looking at how we could construct our answers to certain questions. Within that time as well, I sat in quite a few interview panels for like heads of department and the heads of pastoral posts. And that was very interesting to be on the other side of the table. And I got some real insights from that in terms of, I was still very nervous as somebody that interviews somebody else. You get nervous, you want the candidates to do well. But sitting on that other side of the table lets you get an insight into, what certain principals are looking for. Now, it's quite interesting that I saw a wide variety of different principals and heads of school and what they were looking for and how they carried out the interview process as well. So hopefully I'll share some of my experiences of that today as well. Okay. So I've listed the possible question areas. Now, this obviously isn't every single possible question area that could come up within a teaching interview, but I think that if you were to do your own studying and your own notes and make some notes for these areas in preparation for an interview, it would hold you in good stead. Certainly I think a very common one, and probably out with the education sector as well, is personal skills and qualities, experiences. These sort of general ones that would be the first question that you could relax into the interview. Things like leadership and teamwork would be very common within an educational environment. Short-term and long-term priorities or goals. These can be things that they want to see, are you able to imagine yourself in the post, or how do you see yourself a year down the line? What sort of things would you be doing to evaluate the progress that you'd made? Online learning versus live learning, obviously that would be a new topical area that you would have to revise for in terms of how are we embracing the current climate that we have to deliver lessons online or meetings or various different things online. Parental engagement, obviously we wouldn't be here in our jobs if we didn't have the support of our parents. We have to engage with them, so we have to study areas in terms of how we engage with parents. Raising attainment, we're always looking at ways that we can try and improve the results of our pupils and our school. So what sort of strategies can we use in raising attainment? Professional development, CPD. I spoke to somebody recently who had an interview for one of our schools in America, and they were asked the question about what research have you recently read? And I thought that was a very interesting one in terms of, I'm lucky in that I teach our sport and exercise health science course, and I read a lot of research, but previous to that, I don't think I'd been able to answer that question. So that was quite an interesting one, that they delved down a bit deeper in terms of professional development and asked what actual research they'd read recently. Teaching and learning is the standard assessment. Contribution to the ethos of the school. Now that's a very general question that I think quite a lot of principals that I've come across like to ask. You know, it's quite an open question that allow you to basically tell them how you would contribute, you know, over and above the everyday teaching and learning. Motivating pupils and staff, I suppose this would be an area that would link in with leadership and teamwork. And that's one thing to note, that whatever preparation you do for your interviews, it's difficult because you don't know what questions you're going to be asked. It's difficult to sometimes respond to the questions that you're asked with the information that you've tried to learn. And a lot of the areas will overlap, as will your answers as well. So as long as you do the preparation under these areas and have some things to say during each of these areas in the answers to your question, then it should hold you in good stead. Differentiation of our pupils and students. Scenario questions. These are very common, obviously, to see your problem solving skills, to see if you can think on your feet, about complaints, about negative things. Can you turn negatives into positives? And then a couple of questions at the end I've noted there is, why do you want to work at a particular school? To check if you've done your research about it. And values and principles. So in terms of values and principles, I don't think until 2014 I really understood what my values were as a teacher and what my principles were, that I really examined lots of these different areas that we discuss and thought quite deeply about these areas and thought, well, what do I think? What is my opinion? What is my passion on these areas? And then obviously strengths and weaknesses. You might be asked, what are your strengths and weaknesses? Again, I was speaking to one of the deputies in our school recently who said that the most recent question that they've been asking candidates coming to our school was, how do you manage criticism? Which I thought was quite interesting as well. Okay, so those are possible areas. There might be other areas over and above that, but I think if you can prepare for these areas, that will put you in good standing. Okay, any questions so far from anybody? Sorry, I feel as if I'm speaking to a screen here. All good. Okay, in terms of the interview process, okay, from my experience, different principals have done it in a multitude of ways. So this was one that our previous school principal used, the interview assessment sheet, and it's quite a generic sheet in terms of it has the basic information at the top of it, but then the assessment criteria was graded out of 5 for each of those 5 areas. So qualifications wouldn't necessarily come across in the interview. That would be from the application form. So if somebody was very experienced, they had a master's or a doctorate, there would be 5 out of 5 for that there. The other areas like experience, professional knowledge and understanding, skills and abilities and personal qualities, they could come across within the interview. But it was quite interesting that this particular principal chose to just have a comment section down the bottom. So it's quite a general way of looking at the assessment sheet in terms of the interview. To me, that's mixing in the interview and the application form. Okay, this one here is a bit more specific in terms of back from a school in the UK. it had the question at the top, which was obviously on raising attainment. And then it had particular competencies down and positive indicators that the interviewers would expect to see. Now, again, this wasn't an exhaustive list, but you would sit and you would tick them off. If they talked about certain, statistics, there it is there. They're talking about communication or appointing the right people, self-evaluation, and you would tick these things off. Quite interestingly enough, the grading system was set out to award each individual question a mark, either 8, 5, 3, or 1. So this would truly separate the candidates out when you had a total at the end of it. Now, again, it was quite interesting in terms of how certain principals control the interview process. So in my opinion, there was some principals who wanted certain candidates already, whether they previously knew them or whether they liked their application form. I'm not too sure, but some principals would really control this process and they wouldn't allow you to give a rating until they discussed the answers as well, so that they could probably influence what answers, what scores you would give for each of the answers. So that was quite an interesting experience to have. And the final one was quite similar in terms of 7 questions. This was for a deputy head teacher. Each of the panel members, again, we don't know how many, depending on what school you're at, it could be 1 person interviewing you up to a big panel of maybe 8 different interviewers, but each person would be responsible for asking one of the questions. And they would cover certain competence areas like personal quality, skills, or experience. And again, it's just a general area down at the bottom in terms of notes that you would take in general for this format. So just different ways of doing things. Again, I'm sure there's lots of other different ways out there, but I found these particularly interesting to get these sheets from the other side of the interview table. Okay, so I'm going to move on to the area now about how we can actually try and answer some of the questions. For me, when I first started to think, okay, the recommendations are I speak for 4 or 5 minutes for each of my answers. I panicked at that. I thought, how can I actually answer a question that I don't know what the question will be and talk for 4 or 5 minutes about myself? So I did some research and I've been on a few courses as well, and it's looking at answering frames to make it easier for you to remember things. Now, I don't know if any of you have heard of Derren Brown before. He's an illusionist, a magician through psychology, and he uses one of these techniques here, this mental image of a building to remember, like a pack of cards. You can remember every single card. So this is quite a good method to use in terms of if you're answering a question and you want to try and talk about various different aspects of the school, imagine the school building in your head. So right now I'm in a classroom. I might talk about the pupils who are in the class teacher, the TLA who I work with, the admin staff who influence it, maybe the pastoral staff, heads of department, then the deputies, the head teacher, the principal, the leadership team, the parents. So you're really imagining the school building as your frame, and then it goes out further and further. So when you leave the school, you can imagine that you're talking about outside agencies and parents, and then always try and remember to come right back to the most important thing is to return to the pupil at the end. So this was a method when I was giving some of my answers I found very useful in terms of if I was struggling what to say, I could say, okay, well, I haven't covered that area. I haven't talked about parents because I remember this school building, the mental image of the school building within my own head. The second method is the STAR method, which I'm sure some of you have heard before in terms of situation, task, action, and result. And this is obviously a really good way for scenario questions. So we'll cover that later on in the more active part of the webinar. Okay, any questions so far? You're okay. Okay, learn from my mistakes. Now, number 1 I've got down here is don't get distracted by interviewers who seem disinterested. Speaking to principals who spend hours and hours and hours interviewing, I could really understand at times why they would get tired, they would look as if they were disinterested. If we were doing this workshop face to face or mask to mask, we would try and do some exercises where you give your answer to what an imaginary interviewer, and you keep talking at them even though that they purposely maybe ignore you. It's very difficult when somebody doesn't make eye contact or looks as if they're disinterested with you, but you have to just talk at that person whether they like it or not. Don't stop your answers early until you've said everything. There was one of the deputy posts that I didn't get back in the UK, and I got the feedback from the principal. It was actually one of my friends who got the post, who's now a principal in the UK. And the feedback was for one particular question. I prepared lots for it, and I saw, the interview panel, they're all writing away. And they got to the bottom of an A4 page of everything that I'd said. So I was watching the interviewers, and they stopped. They stopped just at the bottom of the page, and I thought, okay, well, that's the bottom of the page, that's enough. But the feedback that I got back was that the person who got the job, my friend who's now the principal, he showed me his feedback, and it went over the page as well. So I'd obviously looked and put off. I still had other things to say, but I thought, okay, they've reached the bottom of the page. That's a natural ending point. But really my answer was lacking in some content because the other candidate who said much more went over the page as well. So it's really, I suppose, about being focused and just trying not to let some things fluster you. If you don't manage to get all the information across, then add it in at the end. I don't see anything wrong with saying at the situation at the end of the interview when they say, is there anything that you feel as if you've not said, or any questions? If there's something that you particularly have studied, or you feel as if the questions haven't suited you, then don't feel frightened to stop and say, yeah, well, yes, I would actually like to add in this point about this initiative that I've driven forward. Or if you get vital information, make sure you get that across. Asking the interviewers to repeat the question if you're unsure. A lot of interviewers and principals, they like to make themselves sound very, very complex or very intellectual. So if you're not sure about what the question is, just ask again. Say, look, I'm sorry, could you possibly reword that question? Because you have to think about the question, think on your feet, and think about your answer at the same time. So sometimes it can be quite difficult to interpret what the question is actually asking you. Hopefully lots of good interviewers now give you the questions beforehand and allow you to read them as well. Another point there is, don't panic if the questions are very specific. Just identify key words in the question. So they're not exactly expecting, in my opinion, you to nail the answer and answer the question, as long as, if it's a difficult question, as long as you can get some points across about the key area that they've identified within the question. Okay, top tips, I'll just go through them quickly. Like, do your homework, obviously looking online at the inspection reports, the website, so that you have a good knowledge to impress the interview panel. Prepare, I can't say that enough. I was really surprised actually when I came to Hong Kong and I spoke to some colleagues who don't prepare for interviews, that they generally just go in there and try and have a conversation. I think it's very important to try and do as much preparation as you can. I would probably do maybe a couple of weeks worth if I had that time when I find out I have the interview coming up. Sell yourself. It's very difficult to talk about yourself and say how great you are and the things that you've done, but you have to do that if you want to get the post. Practice speaking your answers out loud. There's obviously a massive difference in terms of you reading your notes that you have for your interview and speaking it out loud. So obviously doing a lot of research about it. It's reading them out loud to somebody else if they're willing to do a mock interview for you, or speaking them. Sometimes I do them into my phone and record them back. Not nice listening, but quite a good technique to use. A mock interview is invaluable. My wife is also a director in our school. So we usually, when we have interviews, we have the chair that we make each other sit in, and we fire questions, and then we give each other feedback. It's not nice to do mock interviews, particularly with people that you know. It is an embarrassing situation, but you always learn from your mistakes. If you do a mock interview and then the interview is the next day, the mistakes you make in the mock, you'll never make them in the interview. That's certainly what I find out. Next point is probably, if you only take away one valuable point from this webinar, this is probably the main point, I would say, and it's probably a silly wee practical tip. Use the water if you have a break in your chain of thought. It's absolutely amazing how long you think you're pausing for in an interview compared to the actual time you are pausing for. But just the fact of me pausing just now to have a drink, just gives me 10, 15 seconds just to remember my chain of thought and certain answers and what route I was going down. Ensure to get your unique selling points across. Okay, so for the next one, just a couple of minutes, I would like you to think about, if you haven't done already, what would be your, well, 3 or 4 unique selling points that you would be really disappointed if you forgot to mention in an interview. What would make you stand out from some of the other candidates? So again, you don't need to share these with anybody unless anybody particularly wants to. These are quite personal things to you, but I would like you to possibly have a couple of minutes just now, just thinking, okay, well, what are my unique selling points? Okay, I'm not sure, does anybody want to share anything or ask any questions at this point? As I've said, these are probably your unique selling points. If not, I will fire on and we can cover the, okay. Okay, so it's obviously good to have those down to say, okay, what do you want to make sure that you get across by the end of each interview? Okay, we'll move on to this section of the webinar, which is about structuring your answers. So this is a process that should hopefully put you a bit more at ease. As I've said before, that the thought of talking for 5 minutes for maybe, I don't know, between 4 and 8 questions is quite daunting. But if you can structure your answers using this format here, this is really beneficial into really putting the interviewer at ease. It shows that you've really, particularly with the conclusion, it relaxes them in terms of the other side. You feel nervous for the candidates. So basically what I would ask that you would do is that you would have an introduction. Now this focuses your answer. It gives you some direction for your answers and doesn't ensure you don't go off at a tangent immediately. And it also allows you some thinking time. So if you have something pre-prepared for a particular topic, you know what the first sentence is going to be. If you spend a bit of time on this, you can also share your values about it. So obviously if it was a question on behaviour of pupils in school, you could say, you know, I'm passionate about making sure that the students in my class had very high standards of things. So you can really get your values across in your introductory statement, which is good to share with the interviewers as well. Then for the main body of the answer, I would look for 4 or 5 points maximum. Just bullet points so that you can remember these easy for each answer. And they would be supported by an experience. Again, the best way to remember things is to have it from experience. You're going to be able to have some stories about teaching, about how you've taken leadership forward as well. So give some of the examples that you have. But the main thing here is to ensure that you mention the impact that this has had on pupils or possibly the staff if you're going for a leadership post as well. So that's really important to say. You've made your point, whatever your information is, you've given an example or an experience, and then you've mentioned what impact this has actually had, what is the end result. So that would be in the main body. And then finally, the conclusion, to just finish off your answer, and it puts the interviewers at ease. And when you're sitting there as an interviewer and you're just thinking, when's this question going to end? And just by having a conclusion or an ending, just by using concluding words, it just puts the interviewer so much more at ease, and it gives them such much of a better impression of the candidates as well. Okay, so I've got an example here just that I'll go through with you. If the question was the basic question on personal skills and qualities, the introduction could be, there are many personal skills and qualities that I have that make me a suitable candidate for this position. In addition to the expected skills or qualities, I believe that I've got additional skills and qualities that make me stand out from the rest of the candidates here today. So again, it might not be something that I would say word for word, but I would have a phrase in my head ready to say for a particular question for the introduction. For the main body, again, so we're looking for the points that we've got down there, which would be time management, communication, innovation, problem solver, reflective. A practical example, what do I do in my time management? I prioritize short and long-term tasks. I could talk about them and give examples of those. And then what was the impact? What does it actually do? It allows me to support or focus on pupils or staff, you know, depending on what post it is you're going for there. So it's really important to try and get your points, your bullet points down the side, come up with some examples, and then the actual impact. You know, what happened because I'm an excellent communicator, so what? How is that going to help me in my post or help everybody around me? It's going to improve my relationships as well. Okay. So I wonder if anybody's used this. I mean, it is quite basic, but this sort of like frame for answering in the main body. Takes a bit of preparation, but it's really worthwhile when it comes through to the actual interview. And then finally, the conclusion. Now, this is so important. I don't know what words you would want to use or you would find comfortable, but just even the term "in conclusion," it just says to the interviewers, "I'm finishing my answer now," rather than going towards the end of my answer and then, oh, that's it, finished. So it just, the word "in conclusion," and then just thinking about one or 2 points that you've said in your answer just finishes the answer much more smoothly than just petering out. Okay. And then I had another question in terms of just a pupil underachieving. The introduction again could be how you get your values across. I've always prided myself in the relationships I have with my pupils in my care. I believe that I've always been very aware of how my pupils are progressing, as I know them very well in their learning. However, if there was a pupil who was identified as underachieving, there are various steps I would take to address the situation. So again, it's just having something in my head that I would say, okay, here's the question coming in, pupil underachieving, member of staff underachieving. This is my introduction. For this, the main body of this, the structure would be the STAR method again. So the situation, the task, the action, and the result. So the situation of this, I've had experience of this before. You would describe it because you're going to remember your own experiences much better. A demotivated boy in languages, a girl with low confidence in PE. The task, okay, what is the task ahead? To identify the reasons for underachievement, identify positives to build on, how can we improve communication? The action, okay, what would I actually carry out? What would I physically go and do? I would liaise with the pastoral staff, the parents, using that frame again in my head about all the different people I would communicate and liaise with in the school. Support for learning, make sure that there's regular praise, encouragement, and goal setting as well. And then finally, the result, to tie everything up, the cycle, you would describe the improvements with enthusiasm and mention the cycle of monitoring. That's probably quite a good answer to given a lot of your questions, whether it's raising attainment or leadership things, or you're just saying you're constantly monitoring the situation. Everything's a cycle in education. We never say, okay, that's it, we've finished. And then again, in conclusion, with the scenario question, it doesn't really matter exactly what you say. If you can say a few points about early identification in this scenario or monitoring progress, but the words in conclusion or to sum up, you know, something at the end to say, I am finished this question. Okay, so this is the part now where I've got 2 tasks for you to try out this method here in terms of writing your own frame to answer. So the question would be the personal skills and qualities. Again, we won't ask anybody to identify anything they're writing down. It's personal to you, not unless you want to. But to write down maybe a phrase that you would say to introduce your answer in this question, the main body part, and then the conclusion. So if you want to have a shot at that task just now, just for a few minutes. Okay, how are we getting on? Do we need more time? Okay, if anyone would like more time on this first task, just let me know. Otherwise, I'll just move on to the second question. Okay. Task 2, again, just write out short notes for your answer to a scenario question. So pick a scenario that could possibly come up in one of the posts that you're thinking of applying to, whether it's leadership, whether it's something that would happen during the day that would be problematic. How could you answer this question using the STAR method? Topic. Is everyone okay in terms of topics for a scenario question. Does anyone want me to give some examples?
I wouldn't mind hearing some more examples if that's all right.
Okay, just in terms, is that David? Just in terms of
Yeah.
a teacher?
Yeah, as a
Okay, a
teacher.
scenario question could be one, I think one that comes up fairly often is underachieving boys. You know, maybe boys that are underachieving. So that would be your scenario.
Oh, okay.
Within a classroom situation, or it might be the one that I gave in terms of you've got girls who are demotivated for physical education. So that's your scenario. So how could you solve that problem? What would be the practical steps? Sometimes I think scenario questions are easier to answer with more experience because you've got more experiences to draw on and you can think about the steps going through your head. But the STAR method is a good method to use to try and structure your answer.
Right. Yeah, that is really helpful. Thank you for that.
Okay. Yeah, so I'll give you another, hopefully you won't mind me talking over as you're thinking, but another scenario that I heard recently within our school, a scenario question, it was for the head of pastoral. And the scenario question was that somebody had been found to have been accessing a dodgy site. It didn't say what the dodgy site was. It didn't say who it was that had actually been trying to access this. So apparently the two candidates that answered the question, the best answer came from somebody who answered talking about staff as well as pupils. Obviously online, as head of pastoral, you're responsible for the staff and the students in the school. So that answer that candidate gave was much more whole-rounded. They've thought about the scenario in more detail. Sometimes the scenarios will be very specific and sometimes they'll be a bit more general in terms of allow you to talk about things. So if they're general, then you can take it, you can answer it and go down the lines that you want to answer it with and talk about your own experiences, if that makes sense.
Martin,
Yes.
we have to leave. We have a prior engagement, but we just wanted to say thank you so much. It has been extremely helpful.
No
and
problem.
I will definitely use all of this information in my upcoming interview.
No problem. Well, good luck if you're going for a post then, Hannah. Hopefully it's been some use. If you can take away one or two practical tips, then that's
100%.
fantastic.
There's many practical things that we could use. I also haven't been on an interview for like 6 years, so it's like really time to start practicing all these skills again.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you so much.
No problem. Nice to speak to you. Bye then. Bye. Okay, well, I think we are coming towards the end. My last slide was just basically, I'm quite happy for a follow-up. If anybody wants to have a call with me for a mock interview, once you've practiced these techniques for any of the posts that comes up, I'm quite happy to do that. I've done it for lots of staff within our school to try and give them some feedback in terms of the post, because it's just an interview it's just not a nice thing. It's not a nice experience, and the more uncomfortableness you can put yourself through in a mock, the better. But hopefully today, that you've all, as I've said there to Hannah, hopefully you've found it useful, and you've got a couple of practical tips, even if it's just drinking the water, the time it takes to drink the water, because I drank, I think, about a jug of water when I got my post as a deputy head in the school. That really helped me. And obviously, I would imagine that lots of you are thinking of going for posts, or maybe have posts coming up. So obviously, all the best for the future. I hope that this course has been useful and that you have success in terms of the future posts that you are going for. Okay. At this stage then, does anybody have any questions? If you don't have questions, I'm obviously happy for you. I won't be offended if you go. I know it is late for some of you.
I just have one question. I get the question sometimes about when they ask about your weaknesses, and I know, that strategy is to like kind of turn it around to kind of showcase your strength, but sometimes I feel that that's a little too transparent, but I'm also hesitant to, be a little honest about my weaknesses. I don't know if you have any ideas on how to navigate that. I always find that, just for me, really, really troubling, those kinds of questions.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I suppose you can turn, well, you would hope you can turn your weaknesses into positives and still come across as being genuine. I mean, everybody, surely interviewers know that everybody does have their faults. I've got a department, my own department, we've got 8 within the PE department, and we've all got strengths and weaknesses. So hopefully, I mean, in terms of being an interviewer, unless that somebody really, there's a big red flag that goes up on somebody, that somebody came out and said something, I think they would be quite accepting, even if you did identify something within that question that was quite negative. Sometimes I might say, well, sometimes I'm maybe a wee bit more of a slow burner. I'm reflective in nature. I suppose it's the way that you say it. I'm reflective in nature. I take my time to do certain activities because I want to make sure that I do them well. So yeah, I don't think it will come across as really being conceited, David, in terms of turning the negative into a positive. But yeah, there's no easy answer to that one.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess, like you said, practice will and rehearsing it will make it easier.
Yeah. That's it. Just putting the work in. Exactly.
Yeah.
Martin, sorry, just adding on to that question, because I'm also curious about it. As being part of the panel yourself before, have there been candidates where they've mentioned about their weaknesses and you feel those are quite generic and it's quite ingenuine? Like, say, there's standard ones online where they say, oh, I'm a perfectionist, that kind of thing, where it's supposedly put off as, a weakness, but then they put it as a strength, but then it's something that's so overused, which you feel from your experience as a panel, you feel that those might actually have a negative effect on how you perceive the candidate.
Well, see, to be honest, out of all I've put that down as strengths and weaknesses, but out of all the interview panels I've been on, that question's never been asked.
Right.
I actually think
I had a few of those questions myself when I went to interviews, so it's also something that I do find tricky to navigate around.
Yeah. I mean, as I've said before there, I was just saying to David, I don't think that you're going to say anything negative in that question that's going to put you, make you more inferior to any other candidates. I mean, there's times in other questions where a candidate will say something and it's like, oh, it's alarm bells, but it's more in terms of like personal qualities. I suppose it would come across that, oh, that person's maybe said something there that they wouldn't get on well in a team. But I think there's probably other qualities that you could choose and focus on that would take away the focus from the negative. But yeah, again, it's a tricky one. I'm not answering that question very well.
All right. Thanks, Martin.
No, it's been very helpful. I appreciate it.
Okay.
Thank you.
No problem. Okay, any other questions that I can't answer from anybody? No. Okay. Well, certainly my email address is there. Sorry?
Sorry, I'm a bit hesitant to take my mic off because I've just got everything in the background going on. But I wanted to ask you, how is an interview with an international school different to any other interview? Because, for example, I'm so used to doing interviews within my locality, which is easy enough for me because I understand what is wanted. I understand the culture. I understand, the curriculum, etc. But when going into an international school, when wanting to do something overseas, is there any major differences that strike you?
I would say no, not really, but that's because the majority of the principals that I had experience have been in the panel, they've been from like the UK. So I've had the same sort of experience in terms of being on the panel with British sort of principals and deputies and things as well. So I wouldn't actually say that there's that much of a difference. I mean, obviously this webinar is focusing on international teaching posts, but I would say that would just, these techniques would probably apply. You could use them in any interview setting. So I wouldn't necessarily say there was any difference, particularly for an international teaching post. The only thing that I would... Sorry?
Yeah, because I'm not actually British. I know I sound British, but I'm not. And of course, that might kind of bring up certain questions about if I understand the curriculum or whatever the case may be. But then that you did kind of cover.
Yeah, I suppose really in that situation, I mean, you would hope that the interviewers wouldn't expect you, if you were going for a job in a British international school, they wouldn't expect you to know the curriculum inside out. But in doing your homework for it and looking on the website, you say, understand you're an IB school or you're covering that GCSE. So it's doing a bit of homework really on the post that you're doing to alleviate those. But yeah, there's going to be times where they'll probably ask you, they might ask you something specific about it, or there'll be a different acronym. There's so many different acronyms in different countries and different educational institutions, and you have to say, sorry, it's having the confidence to say, sorry, what do you mean by that? Can you explain that? Or I know that's similar to the country that I presently live in. That's the exam board for that. So it's just trying to filter through, I suppose, the jargon as well, really.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
No problem. Okay. Anyone else? Any other questions? Okay, well, I'd just like to end the webinar there. Thank you, everybody, for your participation and attention. Hopefully, again, you found that useful. And good luck for the future, wherever it may be.
Thank you very much, Martin. I really appreciate it.
No problem. No problem. Bye then. Nice to meet you.
All right, bye-bye.
Bye.